I recently got to attend a class that Janet put on with Advanced Master Gardener Training, and it was great. She is a wonderful speaker to listen to, and her knowledge of all things plants is amazing. Janet is a horticulturist living in Little Rock. She had a 38-year career with the Cooperative Extension Service. That's harder to say than you would think. And for a long period of time was our Master Gardener guru. She continues to write weekly columns for the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette on Saturdays and monthly columns in the Arkansas Living magazine, along with her blog, Planet Janet. She leads garden travel programs all over the world, very envious of that, and now she gets to spend some time in her own garden. Janet is a 2003 recipient of the John White Award for Excellence in Extension Education, the 2010 Extension Educator Award for the American Society of Horticultural Science, the 2016 Extension Employee of the Year Award, and the 2019 University of Arkansas Horticulture Outstanding Alumni Award. Her first book, In the Garden, was published in 2010. Her second book, Field to Feast, was published in 2016, both by the Arkansas Democrat-Gazette. It is my great pleasure to introduce Janet Carson.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Isn't it a gorgeous day? You know, this week has been pretty, then we had rain, then we've gone through every season in April, so it's been an interesting time to garden. But one of the things, if you know anything about me, I love color. I think color is one of the best things that we can have in our gardens. And I do know that green is a color, but I think that when we can have something blooming or something adding to color in our garden, it just makes it a bit more interesting. Now, everybody here, with the exception of this young lady over here, probably remembers black and white TV. And we watched it. It was fine. But do you remember how excited you were when color TV came around? And so who knew what the very first color TV show was? Dragnet. I had no idea. I thought it was the Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color, but that was not. So when that came in, it just added excitement. And the same thing is true in our gardens, when we can put something with color. So, a lot of times we get hung up with one type of plant in the garden. But I also think for color and for interest, diversity in the garden is very important. So I think you need to have that backbone of evergreen shrubs because they need to be there 24/7. But then you need the annuals, and the perennials are sort of the icing on the cake. So there's lots of ways. The bottom picture there we actually took on a Master Gardener trip. That was to Monet's garden in France. And it was like a painting. But every time you go there, there's something changing. That top picture was at Gene's garden here in Hot Springs Village, and he had a lot of ferns in his shade garden. But he also had a lot of color in other places as well. So you need to know what is your style. Now that's my backyard there on the left. Actually, that was another trip when we went to Scotland. But then this one on the right was actually up in Northwest Arkansas on a plant tour we did when we went to all the different artist galleries up in Mountain View. And that man lived in that house, and he used those vines as his screening on his front porch, and his front yard was wildflowers. Now, one of the things I think you need to think about, right now there's a lot of interest in native plants and wildflower gardening. And I think those of you who remember the late Carl Hunter, he would show all these fabulous photos of wildflower gardens, but he would show them in the spring and the summer at their peak. This is what they look like at the end of the season if you want them to reseed themselves. So you need to know the season. And I'm not saying you're probably going to be in either one of these extremes, but if you have a huge yard and you have a very formal house, you probably don't want a rustic landscape. But if you have a more rustic farmhouse kind of style home, you probably don't want a very formal garden next to it. The landscape should add to the value of your home. I went to a workshop many, many years ago, and they were saying for every dollar you spend on landscaping, you'll get that back when you sell your house. Not true. But if your landscape is pretty, you'll sell your house faster. And these days you don't need to worry about that anyway because houses are flying. But if the house is attractive, people want to come in. Now, sometimes, especially if you've got someone who is a non-gardener and they go to a gardener's home, they may not want the landscape that you have because you have too much in there. But know the style of your, and you know, there's lots of rules to landscaping. But if you walk outside in your yard and it makes you happy, you're doing something right because the landscape should be a reflection of you as well. Now, I do say think seasonality. I took that picture on the left at a Master Gardener's house, Mary Wilgen, for those of you from Pulaski County, on Monday night. And her yard is absolutely spectacular right now. But it will be in a month, and it will be the next month, because she's got many different things. Now, the planting on the right is also extremely attractive, but it's all azaleas and spring bulbs. So it's what I call a one-season wonder. It's beautiful for a month, but what does it look like the other 11 months of the year? So you need to plan that there is going to be something with color in every season. Even in the winter, we can have color. It may not necessarily be from blooms, but we can still get there. And that's what I'm talking about with the seasons. All of these gardens are actually Master Gardener gardens, and they've got lots of diversity and lots of interest in every season. So think about what your color palette is as well. You know, I tend to like warm colors. I like the yellows and the oranges and the reds. But you may like the softer colors, the pale pinks, the lavenders, the whites. So it typically helps if you have a theme and come in. Now, you know, you can have every color in the rainbow. In fact, I saw some gardens that were that way, and it's almost too busy. Your eye doesn't know where to focus. But if you kind of go, I'm not big into a monochromatic scheme either. You know, those can be pretty. A white garden can be very attractive. But for me, that's not a reflection of who I am. But white does last longer in the day. But you can see there's lots of different ways you can have the different colors. Now, when you talk about color, most people immediately think flowers. And you know, flowers are one of my very favorite things. But you can also get color from the foliage, and I would say with all of the new plant introductions, especially in the shrub line, you're seeing so many new introductions that have variegated foliage, either yellow and green, white and green, red, purple, even orange foliage. So those variegated leaves are going to give you interest throughout that season. And if it's an evergreen plant, they're going to give you color 12 months out of the year. Now, be careful with too much variegation. If every plant in your garden is variegated and there's nothing solid green, it might be a bit overwhelming. But so foliage can give you color, fall color. Think about a plant that can bloom in the spring, like Itea, and turn fire engine red in the fall. You're going to get 2 seasons of interest out of that same plant. So fall color can also be with like the fall foliage. And then berries. You know, what is the signature plant at Garvin Gardens? French mulberry, calocarpa, beautyberry, common names. You know, the purple berries in the fall. So that can give you a lot of color just with the fruit. The flowers are nothing to stop traffic, but you can get colors on on your holly berries. There's lots of things that do have that. And there are even some plants that have beautiful bark. Now, I think a crepe myrtle that has not been butchered can be just as pretty in the winter without leaves as it is in the summer with its flowers. Now, annual color. This is what I call the icing on the cake. Now, if your entire yard is annual color, that is way too much work. I mean, if you're a botanical garden, I even think there you shouldn't do just all annual color. That's a display garden. You need to be thinking about things that are more permanent. But where you want to put your annual color is where it's going to make the biggest statement. So think about entryways, places that people are going to travel by, concentrated in large blocks of color there. So when you go out, it's like, my best analogy is daffodils. So, you know, in Arkansas, we have a lot of beautiful daffodils. But you can go by a yard. You know, when I would travel the whole state, I saw lots of examples. But you could see one yard that might have a row of 100 daffodils in a straight line, And you'd drive by and go, look at those daffodils. But if they took those same 100 and planted them in 2 big blocks of 50, right side by side, when they're in bloom, you go, wow, look at those daffodils. So the same thing when you're adding annual color. Buy 4 or 5 flats of flowers and plant them in a block or a mass of color. That's going to make your statement. And then fertilize, fertilize, fertilize. An annual is there for 1 season. And you want to make them, push them as much as possible to bloom. So most annuals will bloom better if they get regular fertilization. And know something about the water too. But, you know, that tulip display, tulips are annuals for us in Arkansas. In fact, I'm going to slam Garvin just a little bit right here, and don't tell him I said this. But yesterday at Garvin, we were there, and all the tulips, they're pulling them out because they're an annual for them. And so they had big flats of them. And they had donation, $15, take these. Well, you're just giving them $15 because you might have foliage next year, but you're not going to have a flower. So tulips, if you let them stay in the ground for at least 6 to 8 weeks after they bloom,